Longtime Washington Post reporter and author Woodward has just published a new book, or at least some excerpts of it have come out, which cast a lot of light on former President Donald Trump and accusations that he is basically kind of like the best friends of Vladimir Putin. That he's, at least the way it's being characterized, that he's got too cozy of a relationship with Putin. And that's something that we should be alarmed about. But is it really something to be alarmed about, or is it something that maybe we ought to be doing a little bit more of? And that's talking to those we don't like or trying to have a good relations with nuclear weapons states. We're going to bring in Colonel Doug Macgregor, one of the favorites on our show, of course, CEO of Our Country, Our Choice, former combat, highly decorated veteran, and just all around incredible guy. Doug, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for the nice introduction.
Just calling the shots. It's just the truth of it. It's what you were. Listen, I want to play, first of all, before we get into this, an ad which the Harris campaign immediately leapt on as soon as this news came out. And I think the intent here is to show that Trump has done something really bad by talking to Putin. First, watch this, and then let's talk on the backside.
I talked to Putin a lot. I got along with him well. And I know Putin so well. I'd like to congratulate Vladimir Putin for having made yet another great deal. Did you see the deal we made?
Talk to him like that?
Oh, no, I had a very good relationship. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. And I'm trying to tell people, no, it's a good thing. When you see Putin and you see all of these people, they're at the top of their game. And I also have a very good relationship, as you know, with President Putin. And I think if we win, I think we're going to get it resolved very quickly. I really think we're going to get it resolved.
More good relations.
We're going to have, I see. Yeah, but you know, it takes two to tango, you know.
And I mean, just off the cuff, what do you think about this revelation, which is really not much of a revelation? It's actually been out there in the open for quite a while, so it's not really a surprise. What do you make of this?
Well, I'm sure you're aware that anyone inside the Beltway who suggests for a second that Russia is not evil incarnate is a Putin agent paid by the Russian government or some other nonsense. They've had to demonize Russia in order to justify this massive influx of aid and weaponry into Ukraine in Washington's undeclared war with Russia. It's that simple. It's outrageous nonsense. As far as Trump is concerned, you know, President Trump, and you know I like him, he has a bad habit of equating a good personal relationship with the outcome in international relations. That's simply not true. It's not that I think Putin did not like Trump. I'm sure he liked President Trump. He'd rather do business with him in most cases than others. But the Russians are much more realistic about things. They look at interests. And for the Russians, it's been very difficult to understand why we have behaved as we have in Ukraine, because we have no long-term strategic interest in the place at all. None, never have. And so it's interests that drive behavior in the international system, not do we like somebody or not like somebody. And whether or not we find them morally acceptable or repugnant, it's secondary consideration. So what I would say is it's just nonsense, and we ought to ignore it and get on with things. But I'm sure that if President Trump is elected, he is predisposed for all the right reasons to get along with Russia, and for that matter, China. And we should. This is just crazy, this perpetual war mentality.
Well, and what do you say, just generally on that, about the idea of someone that one of our, well, you can't say allies because Ukraine's not an ally, but one of our, I guess, friendly countries is at war with Russia. What is the downside of, well, actually, let me put it to a different way. What is either the pro or the con in either talking to Putin or demonizing him and going down that path where you don't talk to him?
Well, I think we've been caught up in this tragic dilemma where we decide that if someone doesn't do what we like, we demonize them, and having demonized them, we make them morally unacceptable. Therefore, we can't talk to them, which is the dumbest possible outcome. It's during conflict when it is most important that lines of communication, whether they're secret or public, are kept open so that heads of state and heads of states' subordinates can meet with each other Because again, in most cases, historically, the intelligent leadership of states is always interested in ending the conflict as soon as possible on the best terms that they can get. But that always means compromise, because you're never going to get everything you want. And so you accept something that's 70 or 80% of what you wanted in order to stop the conflict. The United States has adopted this position, certainly since the Second World War, that anybody who disagrees with us is satanic. We can't talk to them. We refuse to talk to them. And the outcome is the war drags on and on and on. Vietnam dragged on for, as you know, 10 years. I don't know how long the war in Ukraine could drag on, because I don't see any evidence that anybody with a brain in Washington is willing to talk to the Russians. So if President Trump is elected, then hopefully that war will come to an end, because there's no reason for it. There never was. And we need good relations with the Russians so that we can get on with the business of life in Europe and North America.
You know, and talking about the talking with people, it's interesting. So that it's contrasted with Trump on the one side of being too cozy. But then one of the other things about this Woodward book is he's talking about that Biden actually has difficulties talking with several people himself. And that's not just Vladimir Putin, but it's this, Gary, if you can put that one with the call out up. According to some of the 5 takeaways from Woodward's book, it's not just an anti-Trump one, apparently. He said Biden called Putin, quote, the epitome of evil, and remarked that his advisors that Russian counterpart is, you can read that there. But then even with one of his allies, he says the same thing of Benjamin Netanyahu's, that he's a bad, guy that talks about there as well. So it's on the one hand, you say Trump's too cozy, but now the other one, you have Biden that sees Putin and therefore all of Russia as this evil, so he doesn't talk to them, and therefore he doesn't have any negotiation with them. And then on his so-called ally, he also has no ability to talk to him. So I wonder if you could kind of talk about the importance of being able to talk to either your adversary or your ally in a hard way.
I have trouble with Biden because I regard him as a windsock. Throughout most of his career, he's simply blown with the wind. He's saddled up with whatever the majority thought at a given point in time. I mean, this is a man who opposed everything from racial integration to busing to, pick your issue. This is somebody that is not a strong character. He never was. That's why he was picked to be the front man for the left, so that they could run the show and do pretty much whatever they wanted, and he'll read or say whatever in front of him. So anything that Biden has said before or says now, I regard with complete contempt. I don't think any of it is real or means anything at all. But the other thing is, this is very important. The most meaningful discussions and negotiations with foreign powers occur behind the scenes. They're secret. You don't discuss anything of real importance publicly. It's sort of like, people hold summits. Well, yeah, but you hold a summit when you think you've got an 80 to 90% probability of the two sides agreeing to something. You don't have a summit when people are categorically opposed to each other. You have to talk your way into a summit. So I think the problem is, very simply, we don't have anybody that understands how to conduct diplomacy, and we have this bad habit of posturing as morally superior when we're far from it. We've never been that way. We never will be morally superior. We need to get out of that business.
Now, when you're talking about, like you mentioned a minute ago, that the Russian state, which is apparently like most states in the world, is focused on their interests and what they can gain or lose from any given situation and having conversations. But when you have the American president that views an adversary as that excerpt just showed, that he's a consummate evil and he's not going to talk to him, then how can America actually get our interest accomplished? Because that seems to foreclose any of these, even the secret negotiations you're talking about.
Well, you've raised a key issue. How many times have we been down this road? It's a huge problem. It's morality and foreign policy don't go very well together. And an awful lot of what we do is for domestic consumption. This is something that George Kennan pointed out, instead of looking at the issues, it's from the vantage point of what are our interests and what is the opponent's interests, and how do we find a way through this. We take the position it's our way or the highway, and we posture, as morally superior. I think it was maybe it was Niebuhr who said hypocrisy is a condition where vice pays tribute to virtue. I think that's what we've been for decades, hypocrites. It's more obvious now, perhaps, than it's been recently, but it's a long-term problem. I don't know how else to answer it, but we elect people based on whether or not we like them domestically. We don't necessarily look at the qualifications that they need in order to be effective commanders in chief. So, I don't have any good news for the American people with regard to who is actually competent and capable of leading the country.
Well,
they're all play actors playing to the audience at home.
Well, and here's the other major example of that you have in an interview with Kamala Harris. She was asked who is the greatest potential threat to the United States, and one would have thought that the easy answer was, well, obviously it's Russia with all of their nuclear weapons, or China with their naval power and their missile power and their whatever it is, 1.5 million active forces. But instead, oddly enough, she says, no, it's Iran. And what she is going to do if she wins the White House is she's going to ensure that Iran never achieves the ability to be a nuclear power. That's one of her highest priorities, presumably being willing to use military force to bring that about.
Well, who's pouring the most money into whose campaign? That's the question. And so you have Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, who seem to be competing for vast sums of money from the Israel lobby and the various oligarch billionaires who support the Israel lobby. Because remember, we don't consider the Israel lobby to be foreign because the money that supports it does not come from Israel. It comes from the diaspora here in the United States. So Kamala is saying, well, wait a minute. Donald Trump promises that he will deliver the Middle East into the hands of Israel. I'll do it too. Please don't walk away from me. I'm willing to do it too. How can you take these people seriously?
Yeah, and meanwhile, I just don't understand why. I get what you're saying there, because the money does speak quite loudly, but it seems like just even a rational, educated comment would be, well, obviously Russia and China, because they pose these legit threats to the United States, but right behind that, but instead, no, she leads with that one. And that is troubling to me, especially if you think that she has a legit shot at winning the White House. Because the question is, if she gets in there, who's going to be advising her on what to actually do?
Well, what difference does it make what she actually thinks she's going to do, what she's told, just as Biden has? Do you really think that Biden on a clear day would have had any unambiguous picture of the world that made sense from the standpoint of rationality? Look, this is all nonsense. These people are competing to a large extent for the same pot of money. Vote for me, back me, I'll give Israel everything it wants. That's all. That's all it's about. Now, the China threat is nonsense. So is the Russia threat. China has its own set of problems, and we are competitors, peer competitors, if you will, on the economic level. We will be for the foreseeable future. Does that mean that we have to go to war with China? Of course not. Right. And this island called Taiwan is of no vital strategic interest to us. Might be to the Japanese, but not to us. And frankly speaking, the Chinese would not pay a great deal of attention to Taiwan unless they thought we were going to establish ourselves on it and put missiles there. In other words, Taiwan is to China pretty much what Cuba is to the United States. As long as there aren't any missiles that can attack the United States, we don't really care what the Cubans do. And we certainly don't want to rule the place. Now, in the case of Taiwan, Taiwan was always the unsinkable aircraft carrier for the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces during the war. So they're not going to put up with foreign control and occupation of Taiwan. That's quite clear. So I think all of it is nonsense. It's all about the election. It's all about, I want power. You have different sets of people backing each candidate, but they overlap. And the principal issue right now on the table for money, if you want money for your campaign, is Israel. I will do more for Israel than he will. He will do more for Israel than she will. It's very simple. There's no serious analysis. And by the way, none of these decisions are informed by any interest that the United States has. And what is our interest in the Middle East? Do we have an interest in going to war with virtually all of the countries in the Middle East? Of course not. But that's where we're headed.
And you know, I want to look at some of the consequences of that. You mentioned at the top of the show here that Russia is acting on their interests. You also have Volodymyr Zelensky, who I'll get to in just a second. He's got his own interest, and he's trying to read the tea leaves because he's getting lots of mixed signals from the United States as well. And he's in some ways detached from realities. In other ways, he's actually a prisoner of his own previous decisions, which I'll discuss at more length in a second. But first of all, I want to look at the Russian side of this because Lavrov has said that there actually is a path to the end of this war. And he said that one of the things he's saying is that, look, the Russian plan would mean that Ukraine ceding substantially held Russian areas of Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia and Crimea, and then to abandon the quest to become NATO. That's what he's saying before. And he's saying if you guys don't accept this, then the only recourse left, since Biden's not talking to them, is a military conquest. And as you're going to see in just a second, Zelensky's not thinking this either. So before I even get to that, what is the net of what we're getting at here? What can we expect to happen on the ground in Ukraine?
What Lavrov reflects is the understanding that certainly over the last 5 centuries, wars were ended with new boundaries, new territories, the recognition of one side gaining something and the other side giving up something. Remember, we've taken a position that this construct called Ukraine can never change, that boundaries, borders are all permanent. No borders anywhere are permanent. Forget it. Our own borders with Mexico or Canada are not permanent. If you don't defend them, if you can't defend them, well, they're going to change. Let's be frank. The situation in Ukraine is similar. They tried to use eastern Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia. It failed. They mistreated, abused, and oppressed the Russians who live in eastern Ukraine, and that brought the intervention on, and the rest is history. We just need to stay out of it, and Lavrov is right. He will eventually craft some sort of solution that everybody can live with, because quite frankly, the boundaries, especially in eastern Ukraine, have changed repeatedly. You know, you had several different people owning, operating, and running the place. You know, at one point, the Mongolian hordes overran everything. And then you had the Duke of Lithuania, then the Polish-Lithuanian Empire. Then you had the Kingdom of Poland. Then you had the partitions, bringing in Russia, Prussia, and Austria. We can go on and on and on. The point is that it needs to end. And Lavrov, given the opportunity, will end it.
And there was an article earlier today about one of the Ukrainian telegram channels, which has said that they observed that the main goal of this war for Russia is to prevent our membership in NATO. This war is not about territory, but for geopolitical interests. And then the Russian side goes on to say, listen, at the same time, the Russian president has warned that the conditions that Lavrov just mentioned will not apply all the time, and the next ones will be even tougher. And we certainly have seen that in the difficult or the different terms that were offered, say, for example, in December of 2021 to have forestalled the war. The ones in Istanbul in 2022 were not as good as that one, but still pretty good. And then we're here to ones that are a little worse, but apparently they can get even worse. How do you see that playing out?
Well, look at the Russian operations in Ugledar and up near Kharkov. The whole Ukrainian front is crumbling. There's really not much to stand between the Russians and the Dnieper River and marching into Kiev. Let's be frank. Now, Putin's made it very clear he does not want to govern or rule Ukrainians. And he's not stupid. He understands the people in Western Ukraine don't want to be part of Russia. He's not interested in making them part of Russia. So he's looking for a solution that will guarantee his security. And he's saying, I can control this territory And from this territory, I can ensure the security of the Russian people. That's really the bottom line. I think he's right. And that's going to happen whether we like it or not. They're not going to pack up and suddenly leave and go away. That's a lot of nonsense. As far as Ukraine's membership in NATO, NATO is crumbling. We talk about it's stronger than ever, has more members than ever. Oh, come on, give me a break. Most of the East Europeans, certainly Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, they're starting to look at this and say, really? Are you serious? Croatia, Slovenia? Well, why would they want to be dragged into a war against Russia? They don't want to be dragged into a war against Russia. They want this to end for all the same reasons that we do. This is all at the insistence of Washington and to a large extent London, our companion in terror. So that's about it. It is tiresome and it's depressing to hear people speak about issues that are irrelevant to the outcome now. The outcome is done. The war is lost. More Ukrainians will probably die, but there's nothing that can be done to undo what has happened. The question is exactly what Lavrov and others have said. Either we sit down and we come to a solution now, or we come to a solution later. And that means the longer this lasts, the further Russian forces advance. That's
now,
all.
as I mentioned a moment ago, Zelensky is in a really tough situation here because there is, I think, legitimate reporting or credible reporting that one of the reasons why Zelensky hasn't moved to a negotiated settlement is because there is a right-wing element of his government that is so nationalistic that any talk, even if it's rational about negotiated settlement, they would probably take him out. But if he doesn't do that and he continues on with the fiction that they can win, then he comes under threat from his own people that he keeps sending to the front to die in a pointless war. So it's like he's in a no-win situation. And here's how he's trying to navigate that. Watch this.
Today marks 2 months of our military operations in the Kursk region. And this is a very important phase of the war, something that has greatly helped and continues to help our country. Ukrainians have proven that they can push the war into Russia. And with sufficient support from our partners, we will be able to put pressure on Russia in the way that's necessary for Russia to realize that the war will gain them nothing. We will continue to apply even greater pressure on Russia because only through strength can we bring peace closer.
Okay, so I wonder if you could just comment on one particular part of his comment.
Dan, unfortunately, I couldn't hear anything.
Oh,
I didn't hear anything.
Well, I'm sorry. He was talking. I'll just tell you what he said there. First of all, he said that the incursion into Kursk shows their strength, and that it's going to show Russia that they should get tired of the war because they know they can't win it, and that his victory plan is to make them realize it so that through strength they can arrive at peace. What is that even possible that Russia would get tired of the war and just sign a negotiated settlement?
No. 100% no. I mean, this is the sort of thinking that went on at the end of the Second World War. Adolf Hitler was convinced when FDR died that this was a watershed moment, that suddenly everything would change because the man at the top was no longer there. It made no difference at all. And of course, the whole Ardennes offensive was predicated on the assumption that they could break through. We would take so many casualties and be in such disarray that we would all give up and go home. It's all nonsense. And the man is delusional, but maybe not. I mean, look, this man has squirreled away or stolen hundreds of millions of dollars. So have his compatriots. This is a black hole for U.S. cash and money. How much money have they made from reselling the equipment we ship over there? How much money have they made through organized crime and human trafficking of women and children out of Ukraine? This is a disgrace. We need to understand what we're dealing with, but no one looks past the situation. They refuse to do that. No one wants to admit they were wrong. And
along those terms, and things are about to get worse. There has been some report that there was, let's see, on the 12th, 3 days from now, there's going to be another Ramstein meeting. And Zelensky's been talking about that a lot lately and saying that there's going to be some real big things come out of there and that he thinks he's going to get some big gifts out of it. And initially, President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken were going to personally attend instead of just Austin, which has been the norm for this. So he's been really excited. In fact, here's what he said about that.
Today, there was an extensive briefing on the front line, our actions and needs. The Donetsk directions remain particularly challenging, and we will try to convince our partners at the upcoming Ramstein meeting of the urgent need for significant reinforcement of our capabilities and positions right now during these autumn months.
Were you able to hear that one? Okay. Basically, he said they're going to Ramstein, and he's going to get all this stuff, and that's where he's going to tell everybody, what they need, and they're going to come back with this really great plan. Well, subsequent to making that video, first the White House said that actually, Biden's going to go ahead and stay here because of the hurricane coming up, and he wants to be, to provide leadership on the ground, so he's not going. But then right after that, Secretary Blinken, who will be in Africa, actually, and he has nothing to do with what the U.S. does for a hurricane, also announced that he's not going to go. So he's canceling too. So now then, I don't know what he's thinking is going to come out of there. But he also mentioned in that same little clip there that things are getting bad on the Eastern Front. And let me actually show you some of what's going on here, because there has been actually a pretty significant change here in the last days. In fact, hold on just a second. Sorry, didn't quite work out the way I'd hoped to. There has been some changes on the front line, and I want to show the people here to show why there's really a lot of trouble for Zelensky. He's obviously now he's going to be losing in the diplomatic sphere. But then this is again the map of Russia or Ukraine where all the fighting has been going on. And of course, we've talked a lot about the Pokrovsk area, and you see there's been a lot of penetration there, and there continues to be so. But one of the biggest moves overnight is in the Toretsk area, which has been a big, important, basically citadel that Ukraine had been defending for a long time. And in just the last day or so, there's been a huge move where the Russians have moved and taken large parts of the city. They've taken almost all of the so-called citadel fighting area in the north here, and that's just one of many areas. This other area where there was a lot of Ukraine troops have been nearly trapped in this pocket here that's starting to really make some close. In other words, Russia's making movements tactically all over the front line now that make Ukraine's position appear even more tenable, meaning they may not get to any kind of a good negotiated settlement. Is it possible, Doug, that they could actually just be defeated in combat?
Oh, of course, that's already happened for all intents and purposes. These pockets of resistance are going to be gradually annihilated. But I think the key thing to keep in mind at this point is there's no willingness on the part of President Putin at this stage to move his forces further west. He doesn't want to. He does not want to end up in a position where he has to administer, manage, govern, say whatever you want, Ukrainians. The areas where he's operating are areas that are historically Russian. He said that from the beginning, and he's right. And those areas are ripe for annexation permanently. And they've already done that, but there's probably going to be some more territory added to it over time. But that's it. And again, it's an unwillingness in the West to come to terms with reality. And Zelensky is a reliable stooge for the West. He is going to sing that tune until he gets word from the CIA or MI6 or both to get on a plane and fly to London. And from there, they'll take him somewhere else along with some of his criminal compatriots, and they'll live the rest of their lives in the lap of luxury while Ukraine suffers in ruins and destruction for years. And that's where he's headed. He knows that. This is not some sort of brave, courageous soul whose heart is with Ukraine. Remember, this man wasn't Ukrainian to begin with. He happened to have been born in Russia, and he spoke Russian. This is just tragic. It's a farce in the most negative sense of the word.
Let me ask you this, Doug. You can partially understand why Zelensky, I mean, he's the president of his country. They've been invaded. They don't have a military path to succeed. He literally faces life and death pressure from two separate directions, and it's hard to know how to navigate. What is more difficult to understand, though, is why the West is even having another one of these Ramstein meetings, and why the U.S. just offered an additional $8 billion to send all kinds of additional aid into a country that any rational thinking military mind can see can't have a good outcome for us, meaning that our interests won't be served. What is the end state for us? Because I can't imagine that we don't see that this has an end game that the Ukraine can't win. So what is the motivation for us?
Well, the end state is very clear. Russia wins, Ukraine is destroyed, and NATO crumbles. Because in the near future, people in Europe are going to conclude that they were lied to at every turn about everything. And ultimately, that they are better off without us than they are with us. That's where we're headed. That's the end state. And we'll get there sometime over the next 6 to 12 months. As far as Ukraine is concerned, it's going to drop off the radar. Right now, why are we having a meeting in Ramstein? Well, because we have an election in November. We want to maintain the fiction that something good has happened and that something good can continue to happen. It's a farce. It's just a theatrical development and movement for the election. That's all. Shouldn't be taken seriously.